Hello, Buckeye fans, and welcome to another episode of the Bucknuts Happy Hour. I'm Patrick Murphy here with you again this week. We're talking Buckeyes, to no surprise of anyone who's tuned into this show. Today, we're going to cover a few different topics. Largely will be another recruiting podcast. We're going to be joined by Bill Kurelic here shortly to break down what him and I saw out at Ohio State's recruiting camps over the last couple of weeks. Those wrapped up on Wednesday. So we'll go through a bunch of prospects, guys who have committed, who haven't, guys we were impressed with, all of that stuff. So we'll try and hit on a bunch of topics there. And then I will do towards the end some basketball talk. We don't do a ton of that on the Bucknuts Happy Hour, but we did get to talk with Jake Diebler for about a half an hour as the Buckeyes kicked off summer workouts with some of the former players back in town, which was pretty neat to watch some of. So we'll cover some of what Jake Diebler said and look ahead to what I think will be a better season for the Buckeyes. And we'll talk more about that then. Remember, if you are watching this live on YouTube, please hit the thumbs up button, turn on the alerts for that. You will get all of our YouTube videos, including the videos we've done over the last month or so with prospects that were out at Ohio State's camp. Additionally, as the season gets closer, we will have way more on there from the team side of things. So that helps us out a lot. Plus, you get all the podcasts. And then if you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please leave a 5-star review, give it a thumbs up, all of that good stuff. And let's get into it here. Bill, welcome to the Bucknuts Happy Hour. You've become a regular guest this summer as we've really dove into some of the recruiting topics. So I appreciate that.
Well, a lot to talk about as usual. I think could almost do a podcast every day just on recruiting. It's that time of the year.
It is indeed. Bill, let's start with what was which had the potential, I guess I will say, to be a big Thursday for the Buckeyes. Still turned out to be a pretty good one with the commitment of Sincere Johnson. Luke Wafel ends up committing to USC. What should the people know about Sincere? We'll start with him, an Ohio commit, Glenville guy, now committed to the Buckeyes in the 2026 class.
I think in some ways, maybe Sincere Johnson's announcement got overshadowed slightly because not everybody, but a lot of people were expecting at least when they went to bed, perhaps on Wednesday evening, that Ohio State was getting 2 commitments on Thursday. And really, they were. When Luke Wafel left USC on his official visit there, he had told at USC he was coming. And then Ohio State made a run at him after he got back, and then he was going to Ohio State. But USC came back and made another run, and another run usually means you've worked on your package, your offers, things like that, work on what you do with the NIL, and they turned him back to USC. Really came down to Ohio State is just not going to break the whole structure of everything for any one player, really. And their way is proven to work. They have the national championship to prove it. So when it became apparent early Thursday morning, Brian Dolan was on that, and I was monitoring it, and we both switched crystal ball picks back to USC early Thursday morning. So with all that happening, I think it took a little bit away from just how important getting Sincere Johnson is for Ohio State. He's the number 2 player in Ohio, for one thing. And again, Ohio State doesn't go by the rankings, but him being the number 2 player in Ohio means he is really, really good. He could be a cornerstone of Ohio State's defense. And I don't mean a cornerstone on the edge. I mean a cornerstone linebacker. He can be an impact type guy for Ohio State. He's been recruited as a middle linebacker. He's 6'3", about 225 pounds. But he also has been told that your play at Ohio State is not necessarily just confined to middle linebacker. He could also play perhaps a Will or a Sam, but wherever you put him, again, middle linebacker first, he is a great, great prospect.
You sort of touched on it there, and I've seen some suggestions of this at various places. Why is there talk that he might move to the edge, and why are you, and I know some other people, confident that he will remain at linebacker?
Well, I think at one point I know at one point he was bigger than he is now. He transformed his body with the help of the coaching staff at Cleveland Glenville. When I saw him, say, as a sophomore, he didn't look like he does now. I mean, he is a solid 6'3", 225. He weighed more than that back then. He has lost bad weight. He's gained good muscle, and he is now a middle linebacker type rather than somebody that maybe would grow into or be a down type guy on the edge. That's not him.
So middle linebacker is the likely spot, but you think potentially could play any of Ohio State's linebacker positions once he gets on campus?
Yeah, they've told him, they've recruited him as a middle linebacker, and they have told him that you're versatile enough that you could fit in at other linebacker spots too. Yeah.
And you touched on sort of the reasoning with Luke Wafel. Obviously, Ohio State only has one defensive lineman committed in the 2026 class. Where do the Buckeyes turn now to obviously boost those numbers? You're going to want more than one, I imagine, once this class is all wrapped up.
Yeah, the one that they got, obviously, is Kerry Wilder. He's an edge guy who could also, by the way, play inside. Ohio State has told him in some of the rush man packages, you could end up to take advantage of your pass rushing abilities as an interior lineman. So that's kind of nice that he's versatile enough to fit in on the edge or move inside. And that was an important get. Carter Meadows, a defensive end from Gonzaga, huge Ohio State target. And he is making an official visit to Michigan this weekend, by the way. Certainly he's one that Ohio State wants. If things continue down the road and Valdon Sonnet, he was here at camp last week via the European program. He is now in Virginia at playing high school. But Valdon Sonnet has an official visit. He's a defensive tackle, has an official visit scheduled for the Texas game. Now, he is visiting Oklahoma this weekend, and there's always a possibility he makes a commitment to someone else before the fall gets here. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Jake Kruel from IMG High School in Florida is another guy Ohio State would love to get. He is an edge guy that they like a lot. They've got a couple guys visiting this weekend on the edge. KJ Ford is one of them. And he's a teammate of Landon Barnes, who also is making an official visit this weekend. They're both from Duncanville, Texas. So those are a couple more guys that certainly Ohio State has a shot at landing and would like to land. And if you go back inside, which is not what Luke Wafel is, but Cameron Brickle from IMG Academy, he is visiting, I believe, Penn State this weekend. And he is a guy that in fact, I know it's Penn State this weekend. He is a guy that Ohio State likes for one of their interior defensive line spots. So, there's guys out there certainly that Ohio State could land and would like to add to the class at both defensive end and defensive tackle.
All right, let's get into the guys.
And by the way, I don't think I mentioned P.J. Dean. He definitely should be mentioned. He has had his decision down. He's done with his official visits. He's had it down to Ohio State, Georgia, and South Carolina for some time.
Okay. Let's get into some of the guys we saw in camp the last few weeks, actually. I want to start at the quarterback position because I know that's everyone's favorite. And by the way, if you're watching this live on YouTube or any other streaming platform and you have questions for Bill or I about the camps, about any of these prospects, please feel free to throw those in the chat. We will address those as we get to them. If you have other questions about non-recruiting stuff, feel free to throw those in there too. And I can try and get to some of those after we're done with Bill. But Let's start with the quarterbacks, Bill. The three that you have highlighted were Brady Edmonds, who is an Ohio State commit, Teddy Girard, who we just saw at the 7-on-7 camp, and Neiman Lawrence, who was also at Ohio State for the one-day camp this past week. Brady Edmonds, let's start with him because he is committed to Ohio State. He spent a few days, actually, at Ohio State, not only camping, but also hanging out with some of the official visitors. What stands out about Brady Edmonds to you? Why do the Buckeyes look at him so early on, and why is he the quarterback in the 2027 class right now?
And go back real quick. I mentioned one or two defensive tackles on the last topic of Luke Wafel. I didn't mention all the defensive tackles Ohio State is still in on. There are others, but I did mention one or two. But Luke Wafel, the original question was, where do they go from Luke Wafel?
Yeah.
I think I did get all the edge guys in there. But for instance, I didn't mention Deuce Gerald's, for instance. He's visiting Ohio State this weekend, and he is definitely an Ohio State target. And Demarion Simeon is too, for that matter. But anyway, back to the quarterback question. Brady Edmonds, he was absolutely outstanding. Ohio State commitment. He, as Mark Porter and I like to say, when he throws it, the ball gets there in a hurry. Teddy Girard, guy that I like a lot, and Ohio State likes him a lot. You and I stood there and watched the parade on Wednesday of introductions to Teddy Girard.
And his mom.
You had, quarterback coach Billy Fessler introducing to Teddy Girard and his mom. You had Caleb Downs, Brian Hartline, Mark Pantoni was in there. I think I might be. What's that?
Keenan Bailey.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think I might be forgetting something. It was quite a parade of introductions there. I said this earlier in the week. If Ohio State could come up with a 2-quarterback class, 2027 class of Brady Edmonds and Teddy Girard, that would be not a home run. That would be a grand slam. So we'll see if maybe it happens. And then Neiman Lawrence, you mentioned 2008, 28 quarterback. Ohio State offered very early. He's not as big as Brady Edmonds for sure. Not as tall, quite as tall as Teddy Girard, but great arm, very athletic. He looked really good at camp too.
You mentioned a 2-quarterback class. We've talked about this before. Ohio State potentially wanting to have 2 quarterbacks in 2027. Buckeyes currently do not have a quarterback committed in the 2026 class. Do you get the sense, and I know I've talked to Brady Edmonds about this, and he seems fine with it, but that these guys are all aware of the fact that there may be 2 quarterbacks and that they are okay with that level of competition?
Yeah. I talked to these guys, and I asked them, what do you think about being in a 2-quarterback class? And they know that Ohio State already has Brady Edmonds, and Brady Edmonds knows that Ohio State is continuing to recruit quarterbacks. Ohio State has been very upfront with everyone. And, part of that is that they don't have a 2026 quarterback. So that's enticing to 2027 quarterbacks. Hey, you don't have a 2026 quarterback, the class ahead of me? That makes things look a little bit better. But there's always a chance they could get still a 2026 quarterback. In fact, one of them is making an official visit this weekend to Ohio State. He is the first official visitor at quarterback for Ohio State in the month of June. So he'll be the first and the last for that matter. It's Luke Fahey from Mission Viejo, California. And another thing that's interesting is that he'll be he is the first visiting this weekend player to make an official visit to Ohio State this weekend, having not already been offered a scholarship by Ohio State. So first, we will be on watch this weekend to see if he gets offered a scholarship. I think that it's pretty unlikely that they would have him in and that he would make this trip both all the way from California and not have a pretty good feeling about getting a scholarship offer. And then after that, providing it does happen, you see what what he wants to do. Would he want to be that quarterback that comes in between Tavian St. Clair and Brady Edmonds and maybe somebody else?
We had a question from Heath Geiger here. Bill, do you believe that Edmonds is a better quarterback prospect than Terrell Pryor was? That's a high bar there, Bill.
True. That is. That would be a hard one for me to say I agree with that necessarily. And that's nothing against Brady Edmonds, because I think he's a great quarterback prospect. But when you look back at Terrell Pryor, he was the number one prospect in the entire country, period. Does that mean that Brady Edmonds won't be an even better quarterback at Ohio State than Terrell Pryor? Of course not. You don't become the best at your position based on your high school ranking.
Very true. Very true. I think Terrell Pryor, correct me if I'm wrong, Bill, wasn't he the highest rated prospect ever at that point in the rankings era?
You're testing my memory, Pat, and I am, as you can see by this gray hair, I'm old. But I think so.
Yeah, I think he was. And then another one on quarterbacks from Terry Slusher. This should say, why didn't Ohio State offer Matt Ponitowski for the 2026 class, the quarterback from Archbishop Moeller?
Matt Ponitowski is a really good prospect. The problem is he is a really great baseball prospect. He is a dynamic shortstop for Cincinnati Moeller. He also pitches, and he has a 90-plus mile per hour fastball. And I love MLB. I'm a Major League Baseball guy, and Matt Ponitowski is going to be picked, in all likelihood, pretty darn high in the next MLB draft. And that's why that Ohio State didn't offer him. He's not, and I'm not trying to put down Ohio State's baseball program, but he's not going to go somewhere that doesn't have a great baseball program and in all likelihood in a warm weather place that can play a lot of games. So baseball, if he goes to college to play football is going to be a huge part of that decision. And Ohio State knows that, he's not going to come to Ohio State just to play football only. That's just not going to happen.
Well, if you won't say it, I will. Ohio State's baseball program is a mess right now, and arguably one of the worst programs in the athletic department that is maybe on the up with a relatively new head coach, but still has a lot of work to do there. So I certainly understand that. Let's move on. Running back, there were two that you highlighted to me, both of which were the two I expected you to highlight. Gabriel Georgees, who I wrote about last week, and Elijah Hall, who is already committed to Ohio State. Starting with Georgees, watching him work out for Ohio State and with Carlos Lachlan, it was almost like I was watching the current group of Ohio State running backs work out with just the size of Gabriel Georgees. He looks like he could step in and play right now physically. What was your impression of the Canadian running back who now lives in Tennessee?
Love him. He is at the very top of the board, and he looked like a man among boys. And he is a class of 2027 guy. So he's got a little ways to go, but he is a fantastic prospect. And I think right now you'd be hard-pressed to find anybody that Ohio State likes more than him in the 2027 class at running back. And he's a guy that, as you mentioned, he's from Tennessee. He's via Canada. He is at Baylor School in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and that is where Max LeBlanc went to high school at. And Max LeBlanc was from Montreal. So Ohio State, they're going back to the well with that one, going back to Baylor School.
Yeah, and it's interesting. The backfield at the Baylor School last year was split. I forget the kid's name. It's another three-prong name, but he is committed to Ole Miss, yet Gabriel Georgees rushed for over 1,000 yards and 14 touchdowns last year. So they were able to split that backfield pretty nicely with two talented running backs. Elijah Hall, the 2028 class, he's a guy who committed to Ohio State earlier this month. I have not seen him, Bill. You have. What do you make of him? Why did Ohio State take him so early?
Yeah, dynamic. He's really fast. He's out of Florida, and it didn't. Well, the thing that really impressed me too is that once he got up to Iowa State, got offered and all, it sure didn't take him long to commit to the Buckeyes.
Right.
Now, do they hang on to him for? He's a 2028, so you got a ways to go on that one before he's signing to go to college. But he sure does like Ohio State a lot right now. I wouldn't necessarily bet against him sticking with it all the way through.
Yeah, I was talking with somebody at one of the camps about Elijah Hall and just how early that commitment happened. And they said that was on him. The Buckeyes were obviously not pushing for him to commit this early. He said he loves Ohio State. He wanted to pull the trigger. And so they're happy to do so. I think, yeah, like you said, still a long way to go. He'll obviously take visits and see other schools and whatnot. But I think right now they feel pretty good given that he wanted to go ahead and make that decision so early. Wide receivers, you listed several there that stood out to you. Eric McFarland, Peter Pierres. I'm reading your handwriting here. Jameer Brown.
Braden Guilford.
Yeah, Guilford. And then Dakota Garant.
Jameer Brown. Don't forget Jameer.
Yes, Jameer Brown also. We've talked about a decent amount of them. So let's stick with those top three, McFarland, Pierre, and Guilford. What stands out about those guys before we move to the defensive side of the ball?
Well, I'll tell you, Brian Hartline, I could have probably listed 4 or 5 more wide receivers.
Yeah.
There were so many great, very good to great wide receivers at camps this summer. McFarland and Pierre, totally different guys. I mean, McFarland is 5'9", probably 185 pounds, and tremendously fast. He's just absolutely dynamic. He's what a tremendous burst and great hands. On the other hand, you got Peter Pierre. He's a big guy, and what a catch radius. He is from Florida, and he rightly so in some ways is getting some comparisons to Jeremiah Smith because size-wise, they're similar. Now, in my mind, nobody in high school at this point really compares to Jeremiah Smith. No. Physically, they are similar, and I was extremely impressed with Peter Pierre. His catch radius is just outstanding. He's got big hands, and I don't think I saw him miss anything remotely catchable that was thrown to him. I like him a lot. Jaquan Guilford, he's making his official visit to Ohio State right now. Ole Miss and maybe Indiana, that's the 2 schools to beat right now. But Ohio State's got 4 wide receivers in their class right now. The goal was to get 4, not get 5. But if you can get Guilford, you don't turn him down. He's that good.
Yeah, and I saw Dakota Garant play in the 7-on-7. We talked about him a little bit last week, so I won't rehash too much. But he's listed in our database as 6'1", 185. I think he's probably a little bit bigger than that by now. But he was impressive. The game that I really watched him play, caught 3 touchdowns, wasn't able to be guarded. It's 7-on-7, so it's not completely real football, but really impressed with him. Defensive side of the ball, Bill. At linebacker, you've got 2 guys, but let's start with Cooper Witten, a guy that obviously a name people will know. His father, the tight end, Jason Witten for the Dallas Cowboys. We both watched him very close up as he was working before camp with James Laurinaitis. I thought he looked every bit the part of a guy who's going to be a talented college linebacker, and I think you did as well.
Yeah, we totally agree. You and I were out on the field as he was out on the field, had come out on the field, and not the biggest guy, but he is really good, and he's got the bloodlines. If he's not the number 1 linebacker in the country for the class of 2027, he's right there, right up there. He's like you said, he is the son of Jason Witten, former Dallas Cowboy, and he's got the potential, absolutely, to be a college star and head to the NFL and be great there.
The other linebacker you put on your list to me was Kaden Henderson from Tampa, 2027 linebacker. I don't know. I don't think I saw him when we were out there. I could be wrong. There are a lot of guys out there. Where does he kind of stand in comparison with Cooper and other linebackers in the class?
Yeah, that group of linebackers that James Laurinaitis brought in for that last camp, it was tremendous. Kaden Henderson was one of them, but there were 4 or 5 others that are high state offer type guys, or already had a high state offer for that matter. But if you're a Bucknuts member, VIP member, and haven't watched the video interview I did with Kaden Henderson, it's still on our site right now. I put it on this morning. Not only is Kaden Henderson, I think he's the number 2 or number 3 linebacker in the country right now. Not only is he a great football player, but you talk about a humble young man that really is impressive off the field when you talk to him. And then I talked to his dad also at that camp. I can see where it came from. His dad is just a tremendously genuine person. And I was very impressed with talking to him. Those two are fantastic. And again, they're great people. They're out, Caden's a great football player, but he and his dad, just tremendous people as well.
As we move along through defenses, cornerback Danny Lang, we talked about him a couple weeks ago or a week or so ago when we were after he camped. But for those who didn't hear that podcast, you were very impressed with Danny Lang. You spoke with Danny Lang after camp. What do people need to know about the California cornerback?
Well, he likes Ohio State a lot. That's probably first and foremost that they need to know. Basically, he said Ohio State is, as he put it, where he's probably going to end up. Now things can change. The other 2 schools, though, that he mentioned were Oregon and USC. So he's from the West Coast. He's from Mater Dei High School. So USC likes to keep those players at their, coming to their school, but Ohio State's doing pretty well too. They've got 2 of the best wide receivers in the country who are both making their official visits to Ohio State this weekend, committed. That being a big deal when you've already got 2 great players from the school committed, Chris Henry Jr., of course, and Caden Dixon Wyatt. And again, both of them are making their official visits to Ohio State this weekend.
The back end of the secondary, it's the safeties, Poole and how do you say this? Taufu?
Tayshawn Poole.
Yep. And
Malachi Taufu.
There it is. Okay. Those are the 2 you listed. Safety. Tell me about them.
Both of them were guys that really were impressive at camp, and they earned Ohio State scholarship offers. And to be honest, I was very impressed with them. I'm sure that if they impressed Ohio State, they're probably going to impress me too, and they did.
I forgot as we were going through the offense to hit on the offensive linemen, but that's always important. You had listed Khalil Johnson, the 4-star out of Cincinnati, and then Cameron Wagner. The Buckeye fans are always closely watching offensive line recruiting, but especially this year, the first year of Tyler Bowen, he's already landed some good prospects. What would make these 2 high on Tyler Bowen's list?
Well, Khalil Johnson and Cameron Wagner both have the length to be really good offensive tackles in college. They've got check a lot of other boxes too, but they both have the length to play offensive tackle in college. And, that's the premier on the offensive line. Tackles the premier spot. Khalil Johnson is from Cincinnati. He was at Taft last year. He's now at Cincinnati Moeller. And both of them are 2027 kids, with Johnson having his next 2 years, his junior, senior years at Moeller. I think he's going to get developed very well there, play against great competition. And he'll be in my opinion, by the time he's partway through his Moeller career, if not partway through his senior season, he's going to be an absolutely huge Ohio State target. Again, Ohio State has offered both of those young men a scholarship already.
And before I let you go, Bill, you've already mentioned it a couple times, but there will be another round of official visitors on Ohio State's campus. Actually, some may be there already as people are listening to this. Who's coming? Who should people know about in this busy weekend for the Buckeyes?
Well, we mentioned a number of them already. 17 guys total. 7 of them have already committed to Ohio State. I won't name them all. I mentioned a couple already. Chris Henry Jr. and Caden Dixon Wyatt. But going to the uncommitted guys, you've got Braylon Womack, a huge Ohio State safety target. Right now, if you look at the 247 Sports Crystal Ball, Ohio State is the leader for Womack. You got Deuce Geralds from, I think I did mention him actually already, defensive lineman from Georgia. I know I mentioned Demary Simeon, defensive lineman from New Jersey, who Ohio State really likes. I know I mentioned Landon Barnes and KJ Ford, 2 edge guys from Duncanville High School in Texas. I mentioned Luke Fahey, and I mentioned Jerquaden Guilford. I think that leaves Derek Cooper. I hadn't mentioned him. He is a huge Ohio State running back target. As I put on our site today, if Ohio State could somehow come away with Derek Cooper and Favor Aki in a 2 running back class, they would, Carlos Lachlan would be very, very happy. And then the other 2 that I did not mention yet are offensive linemen, JB Shabazz and Deron Parks. Those 2 offensive linemen are making their official visits to Ohio State this weekend. So 17 total, 7 committed, and 10 prospects that have not, to this point at least, made a commitment to Ohio State. And hopefully a few of them will in the not too distant future.
Well, Bill, I assume that means you will have a pretty relaxed weekend. Not much going on for you work-wise. No, just kidding. I know you'll be busy. Next week, I think we're going to try and be back with In the Dean's Office Live, the show where we take a bunch of your questions. So if you haven't checked that out yet, please do. Bill and I are trying to get on a routine with that, but we're broken up a little bit here because of the recruiting camps. Last thing real quick. I thought this was a good question that just popped up. Mike Schaefer asking, are we still in the running for Savian Haidider? Hate to see him go north. What can you say about the running back? One of the top, if not the top running backs in the class.
Well, I always say I never like to say never in recruiting. So it's hard for me to say that they're out of the running for somebody that they would really like to have that made an official visit. Now, having said that, as things stand right now, I would take the field versus Ohio State for Haider. He is making an official visit to Tennessee this weekend. He has been to Georgia, Ohio State, and Michigan. In this recruitment, the package and NIL are going to be very, very important. And I think it's not necessarily a battle that there's no way Ohio State could win. I mean, when Luke Wafel left USC, that didn't look good for Ohio State, but they made a run at it and at one point had him, but then he went back to USC. So while I don't want to say never, I would say again, I would take the field versus Ohio State for Haider.
NIL, excuse me. I just had a cough there. Not one of those that I get you sick though, Bill. Thanks again for jumping on. Like I said, we'll try and do more frequently these In the Dean's Office podcasts where people can ask their recruiting questions and whatnot. But look, Bill, I know you're going to be busy this weekend, but try and enjoy it. It's only going to be like 98 degrees outside. So at least you'll be nice and cool in the air conditioning.
And I have three grandchildren here tomorrow for a little time too. So it'll be an interesting weekend for sure.
There you go. Okay. Thanks again for jumping on.
All right. Thanks, Pat.
All right. Thanks again for Bill Kurelic. As we've mentioned, it's a crazy time for anyone who covers recruiting, and Bill does it at the highest of levels. So I appreciate him taking time to give us some insight on some of the top prospects that we saw over the last month and throughout this month of June at Ohio State's camps. There were some good ones, as Bill highlighted there. I also saw some, but I like to let Bill do the recapping of that, as he is much more in tune with the recruiting side of things than I am, and very plugged in on how it's going down. Let's shift over to some basketball talk. And again, I know this isn't always a topic we hit on the Bucknuts Happy Hour, but this past week we talked with Jake Diebler, really for the first time since the end of last season, about this 2025-2026 roster. And I came away feeling pretty good about the situation the Buckeyes are in heading into the season. Now, look, the issues that Ohio State has had, which predate Jake Diebler, I should point out, are well documented. Haven't made the NCAA tournament the last 3 seasons. Haven't made it out of the first weekend to the second weekend, I think, since 2016, if I'm not mistaken. So this program has a lot of room to grow. And I think last year, despite still not making the NCAA tournament, there was progress. If you look back at some of the games that the Buckeyes lost last year, there were some bad ones, some blowout losses, some losses that shouldn't have happened, but there were a lot of close losses. And I think if you clean up a few things here or there, you were able to turn some of those close losses into wins and probably put you in the NCAA tournament, especially with some of the early season wins that the Buckeyes were able to get. So how does that affect this season? Well, I think A, you're probably closer than your record indicates. B, I think the Ohio State coaching staff, coming off of their first year together, Jake Diebler's first year as a head coach, learned some things. Last year at this time, we're talking about guys like Aaron Bradshaw and Aaron Bradshaw and Sean Stewart, excuse me. And the additions of guys from programs like Kentucky and Duke, McDonald's All-Americans that, can these guys come in and make a big impact? This offseason, the incoming transfers are of a different kind. The biggest program that Ohio State went out and got, probably Indiana and Gabe Cupps. I guess you could argue Josh Ajuwuna, I believe is how you say it, from Baylor. But he's a guy who may or may not have a big role this year after coming off of a pretty serious knee injury. I believe it happened in February. So you've got Gabe Cupps, you've got Christoph Tilley from Santa Clara, and you've got Brandon Noel from Wright State. Like, those aren't schools that you are going to immediately be like, oh, this is a huge name. But as Jake Diebler talked about this past week, these are guys who've been in college. They're experienced. They're physically ready to play at a Big Ten level, despite not having done so. And like I said, they've been around the block a time or two. And I think these additions this year make more sense in terms of the way Jake Diebler wants to play. You look at a guy like Christoph Tilley, not a banger center in the post, but can take the ball in the perimeter, outside the three-point line. He can shoot the three, but he can also create his own from there and facilitate a little bit. If you want to play more up-tempo, you want to shoot more threes, this is a guy that makes a lot of sense. Brandon Noel, not the same, but good frame, 6'8", 240, power forward. What I think his best attribute will be is allowing a guy like Devin Royal to move down from the power forward spot to the small forward, and I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. And then you have Gabe Cupps, and I think he may be quietly one of the best additions, not necessarily because of what he's done or even what he provides in terms of statistics. Last year at Indiana, he averaged 1.5 points and 0.8 assists on I don't know why that came up that way. That's not right. Last year, he averaged 2.6 points and 1.2 assists. There we go. On 36.4% shooting, 35.9% from three-point range. I don't know why they showed two different stat lines there. But this is a kid who I think will take some of the pressure off Bruce Thornton. And this is something Jake Diebler talked about not only just the other day when we spoke with him, but also even going back to last season. Remember, that team was supposed to have Michi Johnson throughout the year. He only made it a handful of games. But the idea was there to not make Bruce Thornton have to be the do-everything guy, right? He was able to – the idea would be that he would be able to play off the ball more, potentially even take more breaks. I mean, there's been way too many times where Bruce Thornton is playing 40 minutes a game, and that's a lot. It wears on a guy, right? So a guy like Gabe Cupps can come in, your traditional point guard, and handle the ball. Maybe Bruce Thornton plays off of him a little bit. You've got John Mobley Jr. there as a guard too, who will be in his second year. Now all of a sudden, it's not all on Bruce Thornton to kind of do everything, score, facilitate, bring the ball up the court, all of that stuff, be the primary point of attack defender, those things. So I think Gabe Cupps is an interesting addition as well, even though statistically he may not have a big impact. Maybe he will. Maybe he comes along and can score some, dish out assists, things like that. But for me, I think this roster is constructed in a much more sensible way than it was a year ago, with the type of players, the experience, guys that are motivated to win. You think about Micah Parrish last year, a guy who had won, been deep in the NCAA tournament. Like, maybe these guys haven't had the same type of runs that Micah Parrish did, but it's a similar type of player in terms of a lot of experience in college basketball, looking to kind of end your career on the right note. And a guy like Gabe Cupps, not as experienced, but he was Ohio Mr. Basketball, right? He's a guy who, was recruited heavily by Ohio State, considered that. He went off and tried to do the big basketball school thing. It didn't work out. Well, now there's probably a lot of motivation to do well at his home state school. So for me, like, we're talking about optimistic about this year's team, which Jake Diebler certainly was. There are certainly reasons to think that this season can go better, because I think the roster is in a better shape heading into the year. Also, Jake Diebler talked about the fact that these guys already, this group, has already played more 5-on-5 together in 4 or 5 practices, whatever it is, than they did all of last offseason because of injuries. Guys weren't available, things like that. Well, most guys are healthy. Colin White had a procedure on his foot. He has been out, but he's expected to be back. And Devin Royal is limited. He got scratched on his eye. And so the first day we were out there, he wasn't doing anything. When we were back, when we talked to Jake later in the week, he was doing some stuff, but was wearing these glasses. So he was doing some shooting stuff. I don't think he was doing anything contact that would hurt that. So those guys have missed a little bit, but they have the numbers. They have the guys to play 5-on-5, which is important. You need to help build that chemistry, that on-court chemistry that I don't think last year's team had, even though they won some games early. And I think you saw it trickle throughout the season of, that they, even injuries during the season didn't allow them to do a lot of things that they wanted to do. And then if we're talking additions, you've got Tyler Hero's brother, Miles Hero, and the German, I'm going to try and say this, Matthew, I'm pulling it up to help my pronunciation here. Matthew, I believe it's Gergic. Sorry, my internet's being slow. Matthew Grujicic. We're going to learn that one. Jake Diebler did not know the pronunciation yet. Miles Hero is already on campus. He's working out with the team. Matthew, we'll just go with Matthew. Cannot work out yet. His visa basically didn't come in time for him to enroll in the summer, so he can be around the team. He can watch film. He can watch practice. He can't participate in practice. So they won't know really where kind of he fits until he gets in when they get closer, probably once the fall semester begins. But he's a guy, good size, 6'5", 200 pounds, as a shooting guard, has played professionally already in Barcelona or for Barcelona. So a guy with a lot of length, a good shooter. This could be a really sneaky addition if things work out. I like that they went the international market for that sort of 13th, 14th roster spot. And then Miles Hero, Jake Diebler was pretty frank. And he said he's talked with Miles, talked with the family. This is a developmental year. And if you've been paying attention, Dorian Jones, who was committed to the Buckeyes, did not enroll. There were some academic issues there. So that's why this roster spot opened. Ideally, you would have had this figured out earlier, maybe been able to get somebody who can make more of an impact. But obviously they know what Tyler Hero's done in the NBA. Miles Hero is a guy that they think they can work with and maybe turn into something here down the road. I should mention Tayson Chapman. When we're talking about health, he's a guy who missed all of last season at the guard spot. He also will be back. So that helps take some of the pressure off Bruce Thornton as well. That's a guy I know that Jake Diebler is very high on. And he said there really hasn't been anything noticeable coming off that injury. In fact, it's been more that he's looked like he didn't miss a beat when they've scrimmaged and things like that. And then Amari Bynum is the 4-star power forward, big man. He looks physically, he's listed 6'8", 225. I was impressed. He's a guy who looks like he's probably been in the program for a while. That's a guy that I know in talking with Jake Diebler, they're very excited about. They think that he can give the team a lot, probably coming off the bench to start, but we'll see how that role evolves. But, certainly going to be a part of this front court going forward. And again, a guy I think that makes a bit more sense for this roster. Just in terms of, he is big, but he can do some different things, has good size, like I said. So excited to see what he does as a freshman. And then the Buckeyes did what they call vet camp week this week, something they've done in the past where basically they bring back the old players who are around or, want to come back, want to work out. There were roughly like 30 former players that were working out with the Buckeyes throughout this week. D'Angelo Russell, Malachi Branham, Bryce Sensabaugh, Costa Kufis, Aaron Carter was there for a day, Aaron Kraft, not Aaron Carter. Aaron Kraft was there for a day. Who else? Evan Ravenel. I mean, I could list, there's a ton. We've written about it on Bucknuts. You can read there. William Buford, Shannon Scott, so a lot of guys who played, had success at Ohio State, a lot of the Thad Matta guys. And I wrote about this on Thursday. Like for Jake Diebler, these guys mean a lot to him because if you remember, I think he was basically in a support staff role briefly during the Thad Matta staff, but he would go and work out with these guys before, early in the morning or things before practice, in the off season, stuff like that. So a lot of those guys, Jake Diebler got to know really well. And so the fact that they come back is important to him. But the ability of those guys to come in and kind of teach and work with the current group of players is important for Jake Diebler, but also just to emphasize the importance of this Ohio State basketball program. And I think that is vital because the program in the last few years has taken such a backseat to football and even women's basketball just because of the lack of success on the court. And I think that hearing from these guys about just like what this means to them, what it was like when things were really rolling, you hope that creeps into their minds and as a motivational factor that they can then use to kind of get this rolling again. Similar to what Thad Matta was able to do during his run as Ohio State's head coach. So I think it's important. It's also just cool thing to see these guys back around, especially the guys that are in the NBA. D'Angelo Russell, a guy that, I've watched basically his entire career. Cool to see him back working out, just working out with some of these guys. Jake Diebler said that D'Angelo multiple times told him how hard these guys play, that they were really bringing it, things like that. That kind of feedback is important. And Ohio State tweeted out, the Ohio State basketball account tweeted out pictures so you can kind of go through and see what guys were there. But it's a cool thing. We hear a lot about the brotherhood with the football program, and you see guys back around quite a bit at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. So to see that, I don't want to say building with the basketball program because it certainly has been there to some degree, but growing, I guess, even more each year and more of these guys playing. in these summer, pickup games and working out and whatnot is pretty special. And I think it's important for the program. And then the last thing, and I sort of already mentioned this, was Devin Royal moving from kind of the power forward to small forward, from the 4 to the 3. This is an interesting change, I think. Jake Diebler talked about he doesn't have any concerns offensively. He said that, Devin Royal's worked a lot on his 3-point shot. And, you saw it some at the end of last year, him taking more threes. I am a little skeptical of it. I'm going to be honest. I want to kind of wait and see what it looks like. Devin Royal, let me pull up the numbers here. He didn't shoot a lot of threes. So, if you're going to play on the perimeter more, you're going to have to be more of a threat, not just percentage-wise. So, Devin Royal last year averaged 1.9 3-pointers per game, shot 27.6%, which is not great, but also not terrible for a guy who doesn't do that. He was towards the end of the season. Let's take a look here. Towards the end of the season against Indiana, 40%, 2 for 5, didn't take any against Nebraska, 50% against USC, 60% against Michigan, 3 for 5. So did start to take more towards the end of the season. But if you're going to be the 3 on this team, you're going to have to up that number of attempts, and you're going to have to up the number of makes. I want to see what this looks like before I, praise this idea of moving Devin to the 3. I do think, he's 6'6", 210. So size-wise, I don't think it's a bad idea. But does he have the requisite offensive skills? And then defensively, and that's where Jake Diebler said, I don't think he said he was concerned, but just that's where it's going to be a bit more challenging for Devin. He's going to have to now guard smaller, quicker guys. He's used to, battling in the post, trying to battle bigger guys for the most part since he's in his first 2 years of college. Okay, now can you stay in front of some of those quicker guys, move your feet, be aware of cutting and fighting through screens and things like that you're going to have to deal with in the Big Ten. So, if Devin can make that move, I think that's a huge thing for the Buckeyes. It's just a matter of being able to play that 3 spot on both sides of the ball. And I question it a little bit. I understand why they're doing it, but I think Devin has to put in a lot of work, continue to put in a lot of work in order to be where he needs to be. Cheers. Charles Park said, is OSU still athletic enough on defense with this new roster? I think, now let's be clear. They've practiced, I think 4 or 5 or 6 times. We have not watched scrimmage. Most of what we saw was drills and things like that. But I think they are close to being as athletic. I mean, last year you had Aaron Bradshaw and Sean Stewart, who were both freakishly athletic, but I don't know if that made a huge difference defensively. I think now you've got guys who are a bit more, especially some of the older transfers, a bit more experienced, know what it takes to play defense at this level, not necessarily in the Big Ten, but certainly at the high college level. So, yeah, I mean, maybe they do lose some athleticism defensively, but I think they have a better understanding. And then if you can get Josh Ijnuwuna, again, that may not be the right way to say that. I'm going to have to work on that one. Back at any point this year and playing like he was at Baylor, 6'10", 230 in the post, you will certainly take that. Now, I think it's still a question of whether or not he plays much of a role at all this season, but he could play in 2 years if not. And then Charles Parks, to me, Mobley might be better off the bench. Instant often off the bench. Yeah, I mean, that was the idea last year, right? That Meechie Johnson and Bruce Thornton would start with Micah Parrish in the backcourt, and then you'd have Mobley kind of come on as the season goes along. And, the thing was, at that Texas game, he comes out and plays hot and then continues to be hot. And so he starts eating into Meechie Johnson's minutes even before Meechie Johnson leaves the team. So, the way he played. Now, he did hit a wall, no doubt about it, that freshman wall that they talk about. I think if you're going to bring him off the bench, you have to ask who starts in his place. And I don't know if you want Bruce Thornton and Gabe Cupps starting together. They certainly will play together, but I don't know if you have enough there, especially if you have Devin Royal as your 3. If he's not the shooter that they hope he can become, okay, now you're kind of limited in terms of where your offense is. And, while I think Bruce and Gabe are good defensive players, now you have a hole there. So I assume Mobley continues to start, and then I should include Taysom Chapman there. Maybe he's a guy who, if he can get fully healthy, which it seems like he is, and give you some, maybe he starts at some points, and you can bring Mobley off the bench, or can Chapman give you some of that? Different player, obviously, than Mobley, not the just pure shooter, but I do think he can give you something. So that's I think they have some options, which I think is a good thing, and something they ran into last year of, what do we do when this isn't here or this doesn't work? There weren't the options, especially in the backcourt. Now I think you have some of that, assuming everyone stays healthy. All right, we're going to wrap it up. I want to thank you all for tuning in to another Bucknuts Happy Hour. I want to thank Bill Kurelic for spending about a half hour with us to talk Buckeye recruiting. If you were watching live, joined late, and you missed that, go check it out. A lot of good stuff from Bill, both on what we've seen out at the Ohio State's camps this year, and then what's coming this weekend. Remember, if you're watching this on YouTube, please give us the thumbs up, turn on notifications. You'll get all of alerts on all of our YouTube videos, which includes interviews and our podcasts. And there will be much more of those coming as we get into the football season. If you're listening to this on your podcast platform of choice, please leave a 5-star review, comment. All of that helps us out quite a bit. Also, if you are a Columbus radio person, if you are in Columbus, if you listen to Columbus radio, I will be on 97.1 The Fan tonight. This is Friday night with Brandon Beam doing the Buckeye show. So I'll be on the whole show, not just a segment. So excited to do that with Brandon. We had our first show last night together. Went really well, I thought. And we'll be talking Buckeyes again tonight. So if this wasn't enough for you, if you want to hear more, we'll talk about some different topics. We did recruiting last night, so we won't rehash a lot of this. Join us. I believe it's 6 to 8 that we'll be on. Thank you guys again, and we'll talk next week. I'm working on having a guest or two next week that would be a little bit different than a lot of what we've done this offseason. So should be a fun show if everything works out schedule-wise. I'll leave it at that. Cheers, Buck.